Hi students, so this topic which we will be dealing today involves this answers of these questions, like why is it so necessary that basically how these individuals will be giving rise to new individuals, okay, and also we will be dealing with the topic as to how this creating of new individuals is done. We will be involving not only humans and plants or higher groups of angiosperms, we will also be seeing that how this reproduction takes place in lower groups of organism, like for example the bacteria and the fungi and the protozoa, okay. But before we go on to the details of the types of reproduction, we have to see that what does this reproduction basically involves: the creation of new individuals. Okay, so how this creation of new individuals is done? So basically this process involves a very important mechanism which is known as DNA copying. Now, when I'm talking about DNA copying, it basically involves that from a single DNA you are making copies of that particular copy. Just like हम लोग जब xerox करते हैं, एक पेपर लेते हैं और उसका xerox निकालते हैं. So we are making copies or exact similar copies of that particular paper. Similarly, in case of DNA copying also, it involves that one DNA is basically divided or is being divided into similar copies of the DNA. But as I speak, the process is obviously not so simple as it is. So when I'm talking about DNA copying, this is also accompanied by the other cellular division of other cellular apparatus, okay. So when I'm talking about other cellular apparatus, like for example, the cytoplasm which is there, that also divides along with this. So this DNA copying also involves this division of the cellular apparatus and then the copies of the DNA which is there. So this one particular DNA which was there, it has divided into two DNA copies, okay. So after this DNA copies has been divided, then it is also accompanied by the division of the cellular apparatus, and after this two DNA copies which is there, they basically separate. So the two DNA copies separate, okay, and after this two DNA copies separate, finally we get two cells, two separate cells, okay. So basically this one is the basic process or basic mechanism which is involved in the process of reproduction. Now if I'm talking about one more aspect of reproduction, okay, so this is how it takes place by the DNA copying. But one of the major aspect why reproduction is also very important in the living organism is that they cause variations. Okay, now when I'm talking about variations, if this was not there, then you will be an exact replica of your parents, but you are not. Maybe some part of your genetic makeup of either sets of the parents, that is the maternal and the paternal, might be there in your DNA copy, but it is not an exact replication, and that's why this variation is an outcome of the process of reproduction. And also it is very much essential that this variation takes place because it is involved in the survival of the species. Otherwise what will happen is that if a set of parents, if I'm talking about human beings, a mother and a father giving rise to a child which is an exact replication, there will be no variation in between the parents and the child. Okay, so in that case, again that child will be giving rise to the same offspring. So basically there will be no variation, and the genetic makeup will be very much of a consistent genetic makeup. So ultimately that particular species which is there will not be able to survive, because as and when we are growing in every generation, there are obviously changes in the atmosphere, changes in the environment. So we need to have the variations in our body in order to provide resistance to that particular, or to adapt to that particular changes in the environment. That's why variation is very much essential for the survival of the species. So now we will be seeing that what are the various modes of reproduction. Okay, so the first one which we will be studying, which is very common in case of bacteria and in case of other protozoan, the process is known as the fission. Okay, so in most of the cases of the bacteria and in amoeba, which is a protozoan, okay, so basically they divide with the help of the binary fission. Okay, so this is very common in bacteria and in amoeba. Now, if I'm talking about the process of this binary fission, basically there will be a parent cell with a nucleus and the cytoplasm in it. Okay, so after this, the cell, which is a single cell, will elongate. So the elongation takes place here. Okay, the next step is that the nucleus will divide. So this process is known as the karyokinesis. Okay, from here, after the division of the nucleus, this one is the division of nucleus. So after the division of the nucleus, it will give rise to two daughter amoeba. Okay, so this process by which the cytoplasm divides, okay, that is known as the cytokinesis, and it will give rise to two daughter cells. So that's why it is known as the binary fission. Binary means two in number, that is from one parent cell, okay, we are getting two daughter cells. So this process is known as the binary fission. Apart from this binary fission, okay, there are other groups, like for example in case of Plasmodium, which is again a protozoan. Okay, so this Plasmodium which is there, in case of Plasmodium, which is a scientific name, so we need to underline, this undergoes multiple fission. Okay, so basically in case of multiple fission, what happens, that from one mother cell it will give rise to many daughter cells. That's why it is known as the multiple fission. Now if I am talking about other organisms other organisms which divide by the process of fission, a good example is Leishmania. I hope you have heard this term when you are using it for Leishmania stain in case of the blood cells and all. So, if I am talking about the particular structure of the Leishmania, it looks like this with a nucleus, and they have a flagella. Okay, so basically in the next step, what will you see? That this flagella which is there, it is a much more, in this case, it is not an organized cell division, organized binary fission, but in case of this, you will find it in a much more organized. So, this is the one flagella and this is one flagella which starts growing. Okay. In the next step, the nucleus will divide and the flagella, which was the second flagella which was there, it continues to grow. So, in this case, the nucleus will divide, which is known as the karyokinesis. And finally, in the next step, the two Leishmania you will be getting, each one with its own flagella, this one with the other flagella. Okay, so here the division of the nucleus takes place, which is known as karyokinesis, and in case of this, it is known as the cytokinesis. So, again from here, what will you see? That from one mother cell, you are going to get two daughter cells or two daughter Leishmania. So, this is how the process of fission takes place in case of lower groups of organism, like for example, the bacteria or the protozoa. The next process by which the animals can divide, it is known as the fragmentation. Now, fragmentation is a very common process in case of organisms, like for example the Spirogyra. Okay, so in case of this fragmentation, what happens is that a small body part, so the entire body breaks up into small pieces. Okay, and this small pieces of the body which is there, it is capable of giving rise to a new individual. Now, if I am talking about Spirogyra, so the Spirogyra looks like this. Okay, so they have specific compartmentalized body-like structure like this. Each one of them having its own nucleus. So, basically, this part which is there, that will break, this part will break. So, they break into individual parts. With its own nucleus, and then finally each one of them, so this one is capable of giving rise to a new Spirogyra. And so is this one and this one. So this is how the process of fragmentation takes place in case of Spirogyra. Now the next process which is there, or the next method by which, this was the second method. So the next method by which it takes place, it is known as regeneration. Okay. Now, what happens in this case is that in case of this, the entire body is broken into small pieces which is capable of giving rise to new individuals. But in case of regeneration, what happens? A small body part which is there, is capable of giving rise to an entire individual. Okay, so now when I'm talking about a small part of the body, it can either break from the main body or it can be cut off from the main body. A very good example of this process of regeneration, we find it in Hydra. And Planaria. So if I'm talking about the structure of the Planaria, it looks like this. Okay, now this part of it which is there, this process which is known as the amputation. So a small part of the body, if I'm talking about this part, we have three parts here. So we take the first one like this, okay, then we have the part like this, and finally we have the parts like this. So this individual part which is there, okay, this is capable of giving rise to a new planaria. Like for example, this one will be giving rise to a, first of all, a very small and tiny planaria. This one will also give rise to a planaria, and then this one. Okay, so this process which is there, that from this small part of the body it is giving rise to a new individual, this process is known as the, so this and this process is known as the regeneration. Okay, and then finally the last step of this is that this one will ultimately grow into a proper planaria. So will this and this. So this process which is there, it is known as the growth. Okay, so this is how the regeneration in planaria takes place. In fact, regeneration also takes place in the starfish also. Okay, but let me tell you one thing, that sometimes we might confuse it, that we have many a time seen that the tail of the lizard which is there, that falls off. Okay, let me tell you one thing, that that process is definitely not an example of regeneration, because that particular tail of the lizard which is there, it is not capable of giving rise to a new lizard. So that is not a process of regeneration. Regeneration, a small part of the body which is there, it is capable of giving rise to an entire new individual. So the falling of the tail from the lizard's body is not an example of the regeneration process. And finally, we have the process which is known as, that is the fourth one, which is known as the budding. Now budding, in case of budding, you have it very commonly it is found in case of Hydra again. Okay, now in case of budding, what happens is that a small cellular structure, okay, arises from the parent body which is known as the bud. Okay, so this outgrowth which is there, which is known as the bud, it is capable of giving rise. So basically the bud is formed when it is still attached to the parent body, and then finally it detaches itself from the parent's body and is capable of living as an independent organism. So it detaches itself from the parent and finally grows into independent individual. So if I am talking about how does the Hydra look like, so these are the tentacles of the Hydra. Okay, this Hydra will now form a small outgrowth like this, which is known as the bud. Okay, and this bud basically This is the bud. These are the tentacles of the hydra. So this bud which is there, it will detach itself from the parent plant and it will give rise to the new hydra. And then this process will continue.